Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. So in this particular video we'll be discussing about the cerebellum, which is another part of the brain. We're discussing about the brain as a part of CNS. So we have seen that there are four major parts into which the brain is divided into. We have already covered the brain stem in the last video, which comprises of the three parts, that is medulla oblongata, pons and the midbrain. So coming to the next part of the brain, that is the cerebellum. This is the one. Okay, so this particular part, cerebellum, it's only second to cerebrum when you compare the size and location. If you can see, it occupies the inferior and posterior aspects of the cranial cavity. That is a cavity within the skull into which the brain fits in. So it occupies the posterior and inferior aspects of this cavity. So this is the posterior side, that's the anterior side. So this particular part, it lies slightly towards the posterior end and towards the inferior side. And just like the cerebrum has a number of folds, right? So similar type of folds are also present in the cerebellum, which increase the surface area of the outer grey matter, as you can see. So it has a number of folds which increase the surface area. So that's why there are a number of neurons present in this particular region. So though if you compare the mass, it's only 1/10 of the entire brain, but the number of neurons which are present in this particular region, it's nearly half of the neurons which are present in the brain, which are located only in the cerebellum. So this particular part, it is located posterior to the brain stem, that is medulla and the pons, and inferior to the posterior aspects of the cerebrum. And there is a groove which separates cerebellum from the cerebrum. That groove is known as transverse fissure. So also is present tentorium cerebelli. Remember that one? When we are discussing about the protective layers of the brain, dura mater, which has a double layer, and the dura mater has certain extensions. So this particular extension of dura mater, that is tentorium cerebelli, it is extending in between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. So it is separating the cerebrum from the cerebellum, these two structures. Transverse fissure, which is a groove, and tentorium cerebelli, which is a part of the dura mater. Now, if you have a look at this particular part, that is cerebellum, either from the superior end or from the inferior end, okay, it will resemble like a butterfly. As you can see, this particular view, it's a superior view. You are looking at this cerebellum from top, so it's a superior view, and this one is the inferior view. You are looking at this cerebellum from bottom. Now either of these appear like a butterfly, right? So it has a central constricted area that is known as vermis, means worm. It is a worm like structure, that's why it is known as vermis. And it has lateral wings in contact with butterfly. So these lateral areas, these are called as lobes. So there are lobes into which this particular lateral areas are divided into. So collectively these lobes on either sides, these are called as cerebellar hemispheres. So this one and this one. That's a right one and that's a left one. So each hemisphere, it comprises of the same lobes on either sides, which are separated by deep and distinct fissures. Now the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe, or it is also known as the middle lobe, this usually governs the subconscious aspects of the skeletal muscle movements. And there is one more lobe known as the flocculonodular lobe. Flocculo means wool-like tuft. As you can see, this one and this one. So this is called as the flocculonodular lobe. So this is present on the inferior side of the cerebellum. So this is mainly associated with the equilibrium and the balance. Now, if you look at the mid-sagittal plane of the cerebellum, you can see two distinct areas. The outer region, which is mainly made up of the grey matter, comprises of the cell bodies, unmyelinated axons and dendrites. So it comprises of the outer layer called as the cerebellar cortex. So that's the cerebellar cortex, which is made up of the grey matter. So it comprises of a number of parallel folds, right? As you can see over here, that there are a number of folds, right? This is the one, this one, this one. So a number of folds are present over here. So these folds are known as folia, means leaves. And deeper to the grey matter, that's the cerebellar cortex, lies the white matter, which mainly comprises of the myelinated axons. So this white matter, it is known as arbor vitae, means tree of life. So this appears like branches of trees. That's why it is called as arbor vitae. That's a white matter. Now within these white matters are located the cerebellar nuclei. So these are again regions of grey matter, which comprises of the cell bodies of the axons, which are carrying impulses from cerebellum to the other centers of the brain. Now apart from this, there are three paired structures known as cerebellar peduncles. Now the main function of these peduncles is to attach the cerebellum to the brain stem. It is attached to the brain stem. It comprises of a number of axons which are traveling along these peduncles, so that there is exchange of information between the cerebellum and the rest of the part of the CNS. So these cerebellar peduncles, these mainly comprises of the bundles of white matter, which comprises of the axons. Now there are three pairs of these cerebellar peduncles. That is the superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now why these are named so is due to their location. As you can see, this one, that's the one which is located superior. So either side there will be one. So it's a paired structure. The middle one, it is the largest one, and that's the inferior one. So the superior cerebellar peduncle, it mainly contains the axons that extend from the cerebellum to the red nucleus of the midbrain. Remember the red nucleus? The red nuclei, it's paired in nature, right, on either sides, which is present in the midbrain. Appears reddish due to the lot of blood supply and iron containing pigments. So also it relates to the several nuclei which are present in the thalamus. So these axons are also passing through the superior cerebellar peduncles. Then the middle cerebellar peduncles. These are largest in size. So these axons, they carry the impulses for voluntary movements from pontine nuclei. Pontine nuclei are present in the pons, right? So from here into the cerebellum. So the inputs for pontine nuclei, they are received from the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. So for the coordination of the motor movements, voluntary movements, these axons pass through these middle cerebellar peduncle. Then coming to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, this is the one. So this comprises of a number of types of axons. So it comprises of the axons of spinocerebellar tracts. So these will be arising from the spinal cord towards the cerebellar areas. So these carry the sensory information from the proprioceptors of the trunk and the limbs, which will make you aware about the position. Also it comprises of the axons from the vestibular apparatus of the inner ear and from the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons. So this will carry the sensory information from the proprioceptors in the head towards the cerebellum. Apart from this, there are axons which are arising from the inferior olivary nucleus. Remember this one, which is present in the olive on either sides of the medulla. So this will help in regulating the activity of cerebellar neurons, right? Apart from this, there are axons that extend from the cerebellum to the vestibular nuclei, which is present in the medulla and the pons. Also are the axons that extend from the cerebellum to the reticular formation. What is a reticular formation? It is a network of white and grey matter interspersed, which passes across the brainstem, right? So there are connections in between this reticular formation and the cerebellum as well. So this is to do with the structure of the cerebellum. Now coming to the functions of cerebellum. So the main function of cerebellum is to evaluate how well the movements which are initiated by the motor areas in the cerebrum, these are actually carried out. How well these are executed. Now remember, the cerebrum, it has a number of areas. So motor areas, they will send the impulses for some output, some movement. Now cerebellum will continuously monitor whether these movements are being carried out appropriately or no. So that's being monitored by the cerebellum. Now supposing if there are some discrepancies, if it is not appropriate, so the cerebellum, it sends the feedback signals to the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. It has connections with the thalamus, right? So it sends the signal that something is not correct. So these feedback signals will help in correcting the errors of the movements, or to smoothen the movements, or coordinate some complex sequences of skeletal muscle contractions. So if there is anything wrong, it will help in correction. So cerebellum, it is generally monitoring the movements which are initiated by the cerebral cortex, whether they are going proper. If not, it will send a signal that something is not correct and needs to be corrected. Apart from that, it also helps in regulating the posture and balance of the body. So this will help in skilled motor activities, like say for example you're catching a ball or you're dancing. You make specific movements, right? Or when you're speaking, your body language, all that is controlled by the cerebellum. So also there are connections, right, in between cerebellum and certain areas of the cerebral cortex. So this suggests that it also has a function to play in the cognition, that is acquisition of some knowledge. So these are non-motor function, language processing. So it's not only pertaining to the motor functions, but it is also associated with cognition and language processing. Apart from this, studies also suggest that it plays a role in processing some sensory information also, because it has sensory inputs, right, from the spinal cord. So it helps in processing these information also. So these are the several roles played by the cerebellum. Okay, though it's a small part, still it plays a very important role in coordinating the motor functions, correcting them if it is going wrong, also in learning, okay. Thank you for watching.